And with all of the buzz happening around men dominating women's sports, I decided to take a little deep dive. Keep watching to hear more. Also in the news, we have an Austin based doctor coming forward and saying that she gave patients as young as 8 to 9 puberty blockers. You thought they waited until puberty? You thought wrong. All of this and more on today's episode of the Demetrios Araujo Show.
Facts over tracks, this and that, spitting slow, spitting fast, I could roast, I could gas, think I'm okay at last, but I don't know if that can erase all the past.
According to the National Library of Medicine, over the last 2 decades, we saw a sharp incline in the number of people wanting to transition from a woman to a man. But what people don't talk about is that in the same exact study, they say, and I quote, the prevalence gender dysphoria has recently been estimated as high as 390 to 460 per 100,000 people, with a constantly greater prevalence of trans women than trans men, female to man. But can we stop for a second and ask ourselves why this is? Why is it that men want to change into being a woman rather than the opposite? Is it because they want to dance around in a dress? Or is it because when it comes to high school and college sports, they are given more opportunity? I say it's the latter, but it's not just my opinion. Take a look at this. According to the Alliance Defending Freedom, Dr. Brown cites research showing that allowing males to compete against female athletes in track and field could allow, quote, many who would not be considered top-tier male performers to replace the world's most skilled female athletes on the podium. For example, in 2017 alone, well over 5,000 males, including some under 18 years old, ran 400-meter times that were faster than the personal best of the United States Olympic gold medalists. If this doesn't tell you right here that men are built different than women, then we can go and dig deeper. According to the same exact study by Alliance Defending Freedom, despite greater body weight, males have a roughly 15 to 20% jumping average over women. When examining the physical jumping needed in volleyball, one study found that on average, male players jumped 50% higher during an attack at the net than female players. Even if male inhibitors and cross-sex hormones, it did not reverse the distinct advantage males have over females. Now, this whole idea of women's sports in itself is a new phenomenon. Before the 1970s, women were not represented in high school and girls' teams at all. From the 1971 to 1972 school year, only 7% of high school athletes were girls. Now, in the 2010 to 2011 school year, 41% of athletes were girls. What caused this change? Well, a little legislation called Title IX. This law made it so girls and boys have the same advantages and disadvantages on their respective teams. Also, that they were given the same opportunity as their counterparts. Looking at the data, it really did change the way sports teams were designed, and that was for the better. But why do we now want to give men the opportunity to face off against women, even though we now know that there are distinct differences between the two biological sexes? This is because schools are run by left-wing politicians that like to show off how woke they are by upping up the ante on their policies in a contest among themselves to see who can push a more woke agenda. This is a clear unfair treatment, and this should not be taken lightly by the girls that play on these teams. According to the same exact study, here are a few of these championship titles that were taken away from actual women working their butt off every single day just to face off against a man they will never be able to defeat. At the 2018 CIAC State Open Championship, 2 males took first place and second place in the women's varsity 100-meter dash. At the 2019 Indoor Track Championship, a male athlete won both the women's 55-meter dash and the women's 300-meter dash. At the 2019 CIAC Combined State Open Championship, a male athlete won the women's 200-meter dash. If these men are clear as day, taking scholarships, opportunities, and resources away from the female athletes, and why doesn't Title IX step in to help them out? This is because the education secretary doesn't even know what a woman is. Roll the clip.
So can you please tell me, or can you please define for me, what is a woman?
A Our focus at the department is to provide equal access to students, including students who are LGBTQ, access free from discrimination.
Okay, well, is that, so what's the definition of a woman? You haven't given me that. You haven't answered my question.
I think that's almost secondary to the important role that I have as Secretary of Education.
My question is not secondary. My question is very simple. What does HHS say the definition of a woman is?
I lead the Department of Education, and my job is to make sure that all students have access to public education, which includes co-curricular activities. And I think you highlighted pretty well the importance of Title IX and giving students equal access, whether it's scholarship and facilities.
Okay, so you're not going to answer my question.
If the Secretary of Education doesn't even know what Title IX does, he should not even be in any leadership positions. Congress passed Title IX, a piece of legislation intended to give women and girls equal opportunities in education. Since its passage in law, women have been given exponentially more opportunities to play organized sports. Now, what is a woman? An adult human female. What is a female? A human sex that is the opposite of male. These are very easy answers, but he doesn't want to answer these questions that could make the men winning and dominating women's sports upset. Boo-hoo, cry me a river so I can sail across it. Your feelings don't take priority over people's livelihood and opportunities that they work their whole life for. Sorry, not sorry. With that being said, let's move on to the headlines of the week. You might see that this show has changed a little. That's because I wanted to freshen it up a bit. So we added a new segment near the end where you all might like. Mondays, we have Music Mondays, where we react to music videos that are popular that week. But this is exclusively on Rumble. So if you want the exclusive content, head over to the link down below and check out the show on there. Also, so you know, all past episodes are already live on Rumble. Anyways, digging into the first article, we have a Project Veritas expose. Let's dig in. Moving with this first article, we actually have, starting from the top, WPATH connected transgender health doctors prescribe puberty blockers to minors as young as 8 years old, and irreversible cross-gender hormones to minors as young as 14 years old. Most kids are mature enough to make a relatively informed decision. That's according to this doctor. Now let's dig into the video that we have here.
They said it was transition or suicide. Like, I was given no choice. I was told you will kill yourself if you don't go through with these treatments.
It's very much, pro-hormone, pro-changes. If you don't do this, your child will kill themselves. That is the most common theme.
You don't think anybody can do that for a 10-year-old to do the surgery? They could, yeah. I've never done a 10-year-old. Yeah. To be quite fair with you, I've done 15, 16.
So Mount Sinai Adolescent Clinic, they started age 10. She did say this about surgery.
The way to go at this age 10, would be something like a puberty blocker. When you then get to age 14, is when I'll consider some, cross-gender hormones. 14 is a reasonable age. Most kids are mature enough to make a relatively informed decision.
Okay, so I'm going to stop them right here. If they can make an informed decision, why don't we let them drink? Why don't we let them get a firearm? Why don't we let them get tattoos? Why don't we let them get their license? Why don't we let them get a car? Why don't we let them get a house, a mortgage? Why don't we let them rent from other people? We don't, because we typically wait until 18 in the United States, because we know that at 18, you have won through enough in your life to have a relatively informed decision. Not 14 years old when you're in the middle of middle school. Because, like we said, social contagion is the most prevalent during middle school to high school, because you're being indoctrinated by these teachers, not only these teachers, but your classmates and all these other things that you will not normally do if you are by your own devices when you're 18 to 21.
Got a relatively informed decision.
Anyone who says that you can change your sex is lying to you. You will be chasing constant drugs and surgeries for the rest of your life.
10 years old coming by themselves? 10, 11, yes.
Most of the kids are nowhere talk about in any kind of a brain space to really talk about it in a serious way. We still want the kids to be happier in the moment, right?
The science isn't really settled about the best way to do that.
We brought in our own therapist to write our letters to rubber stamp our surgeries.
And they have to understand that the surgery itself is irreversible.
So on that very first appointment with Shayna Gordon, she told me my projected path. She said, you are going to get top surgery and bottom surgery because you need it to be aligned, and I will write you your letters of recommendation, yours for hormones, but this is your path.
Meet Prisha Mosley. At age 25, she is undergoing the gender detransition process after medical professionals convinced her as a troubled teenager that she was a boy, needed to inject testosterone, and have a double mastectomy just after her 18th birthday.
I began testosterone within weeks by getting a letter of recommendation, which the trans community told me I needed to unlock all treatment. So I found a gender-affirming therapist who was certified by WPATH online, and I had a very brief, 15 to 30-minute appointment with her wherein she told me that I was a boy. So then I took that letter of recommendation to a pediatric endocrinologist, and that very same day I started testosterone, and then not even a whole year later, at 18, I had a radical double mastectomy.
Project Veritas has previously reported on WPATH, the World Professional Association for Transgendered Health. WPATH is at the epicenter of the nearly billion-dollar industry diagnosing gender dysphoria and the subsequent sex reassignment surgery market.
Some of the Dutch researchers gave some data about young adults who had transitioned and reproductive regret, and it's there. And I don't think any of that surprises us. I try to talk about it, but most of the kids are nowhere in any kind of a brain space to really, really, really talk about it in a serious way. That's always bothered me, but we still want the kids to be happier in the moment, right?
No, we don't, because kids don't know best. Kids are gonna tell you. They're going to sit there, they're going to tell you, oh, I'm a princess, oh, I'm a firefighter. I used to say that I wanted to be a firefighter when I was little. What are we going to take that and say, no, don't, now you have to be a firefighter? Then I don't want to be a firefighter. If you're telling me what to do, I don't want to be a firefighter. If I tell you when I want to do something when I'm little, it doesn't make any sense because it's based off of the day. It's based off of that hour. It's based off of what I'm watching on TV. I thought that I was a robot when I was little because I wanted to go into Phineas and Ferb and go with Doofenshmirtz, if you know what I'm talking about. That's a TV show on Disney. So I used to watch Disney all the time. So that could persuade me into thinking that I wanted to do a certain thing when I'm older. I wanted to be a scientist when I was younger. I don't want to be a scientist now. So things can change over time. When you're a kid, you don't know what's going on in your whole entire life because you have that life ahead of you. You don't actually know what you want to do. You don't actually know who you are because you're 7 years old, you're 10 years old, 11, 12, 13. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do when I was older or as a grown-up until I was 18, until I was 19, because in actuality, I knew nothing about the world when I was younger. I knew nothing about it. Even though I knew, or I thought I knew about the world, I had no idea about bills. I had no idea about credit cards. I had no idea about mortgage. I had no idea about your credit score. I had no idea about the most fundamental financial decisions that I could be making for myself. Nonetheless, that's neglecting the whole entire other facet of my life is I just thought that food appeared in the fridge. That's just neglecting everything else. I knew that food happened to just appear in the fridge. I knew that we just got it from the supermarket, but I did not know how to earn money. I did not know how to balance credit cards. I did not know how to track my spending. I didn't know any of that. But that happened later in life with research and time going into this. And as soon as I turned 18, I was ready for all of these financial decisions that I was putting ahead of myself. That's because time went on. I matured. I wasn't just going to spend money on these worthless things at Toys R Us anymore. I wasn't going to just spend worthless toys at Walmart anymore. I knew how to get exactly what I needed because I'm not a child anymore. I got maturity and I grew up. That's exactly what everybody needs to do.
But, you know, we still want the kids to be happier in the moment, right?
At the core of our investigation is just how quickly medical professionals will offer life-altering treatments to young children, which begs the question, how young is too young?
Exactly.
I've never done a 10-year-old, to be quite fair with you. I've done 15, 16.
Meet Dr. Matthew Pabis, a family medicine specialist at the St. Mark's Institute in New York City. Here, he admits that he performs transgender surgery on children as young as 15.
You don't think anybody can do that for a 10-year-old to do the surgery? They could, yeah. That's what we're looking for. We're looking for people that can do that. That's going to be definitely a psychiatrist to sign off on it. Okay. 100%. If we were able to get that, though, from a certified psychiatrist, we could bring that into the person, and they wouldn't be like, oh, they're too young. Again, I'm going to hook you up with the groups that actually do this, like centers. Okay. Centers that do this. Yeah. So they will have all the resources in one. I'm not going to leave you hanging. Just at 10 years old, it's right when puberty stage. So I don't know. So I don't want to shortchange him blockers, testosterone blockers, something bones fused in each. You know what I mean? Like I don't know if you know what I mean? Like I don't know if delay puberty or delay puberty or whatever they do till age 14. Then start the little bit.
It's just the trauma.
It's just the trauma. That's also.
Oh no! The trauma of you actually going through your designed thing. I just can't. The trauma. Oh my God, the trauma. Listen, if you think that going through puberty is trauma, you need psychological help. And it's not the help that they want to give you, it's the help that you need. You need to realize that you are actually the sex that you are. You need to embrace the fact that you are. If you don't want to embrace the fact that you're feminine, then you don't have to. You can be a tom girl. But it doesn't mean that you are the opposite sex. That's the most important. If you are a guy and you want to paint your nails, it doesn't mean that you're the opposite sex. It means that you're just a feminine guy. It means that you're a masculine girl. It does not mean that you completely turn the boat around and you're the opposite sex. Embrace the fact that you are a girl or you're a girl or a guy. And that's exactly what you guys need to do.
Like, should we just be on blockers now? Like, where nothing's going to grow? Testosterone the hormone blockers. Once you get over, like, they'll just stop you where you are. So I'd have to think, but I usually don't do such young kids, 10-year-olds. So I'll call around and find a place for you guys. I won't leave you guys hanging. Yeah. So, like, I know Callan Lord. I don't know if you look them up. They're a big thing. They might do children. I just will call around.
We went to Callan Lord, which describes itself as, quote, the global leader in LGBTQ healthcare. The community health center based in New York City was quick to address what services could be offered to our hypothetical 10-year-old.
So I'm not sure, like, why we don't take people younger than 13. So we don't have any surgical care. That's not part of anything we do here. Okay. But we refer patients we have surgery navigators, a team of them that help with external surgery. Yeah, I don't know what the youngest would be, but I can try to get that information. So I spoke to her, and so she said the only reason that we cut off at 13 is because we're a teen adolescent program. That's literally the reason that we don't do pediatric care. Okay. She said that it definitely exists, pediatric trans care definitely exists. So Mount Sinai Adolescent Clinic, they started age 10. This is the doctor. Kind of supportive, have tons of group and supportive services. So this is the website to it.
So we spoke to Dr. Stever, who had this to say regarding minors seeking transgender care.
Would the next step, or is there a possibility that we could get them on puberty blockers soon?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, a 10-year-old. So I follow the WPATH guidelines, the World Professional Association Transgender Health Guidelines. And really what they would say is the way to go at this age 10, would be something like a puberty blocker. Either Leuprolide, which is an injection every 3 months, or triptorelin, which is an injection every 6 months. And that really stops puberty pretty quickly so that no further development of the secondary sexual characteristics happen. So things like there's no real chest development, there's no menstruation, things like that. And it's a safe medicine to use for up to 3-4 years or so. After that, there's some question about bone acquisition. When you then get to age 14, is when I'll consider some, cross-gender hormones. 14 is a reasonable age. Most kids are mature enough to make a relatively informed decision.
Okay, so how about if we follow that same exact kid that started when he was 10 years old, and then now 4 years down the line, he just took these puberty blockers. He stopped puberty, or she stopped puberty. She has no breast. He has no man part. We're not going to say on the show. And his whole entire life is ruined now because it stunted his growth. He does not fit into any gender now because he stopped his puberty, so he doesn't look like a man. He is artificially looking like a woman, so he doesn't look like a woman. And then now we can go to the girl and say, no, now the girl does stunted her growth. She has no upstairs of her. She has no downstairs of her. It's just completely mutilated 4 years down the pipeline. And then 4 years down the pipeline, you're still very, very young. 14 years old is still very, very young. I did not know what the heck I was going to be when I was 14 years old. And now we're just going to say, yeah, cross-sex hormones. And then now you're going to take the opposite sex. If you're a guy, you're going to take estrogen. If you're a girl, you're going to take testosterone. What? So we're going to bulk you up? No, I just don't understand what you think is going to happen in the age that you're talking about. In 10 to 14 years old, nothing's going to change. 14 years old, you're going to say, yeah, this is the best decision I'm ever going to make. 4 years down the line, now 8 years into this transition, or this quote-unquote transition, you're going to say, is this what I want to do at 20 years old? It's found that you will commit suicide. This does not mitigate the harmful effects of your disability, of your gender dysphoria. What you needed to do was actually go to a therapist and have them embrace the fact that you are a girl or embrace the fact that you are a guy. We need to bring that back. Now, with that being said, that's going to do it for the headlines of the week. Now let's move into the media's take.
I don't ever slow up, no I don't take I got no love.
Moving into the first article, we actually have a CNN article. We have Ron DeSantis facing challenges at home will test presidential ambitions overseas. After a trying week of his national political ambitions, Governor Ron DeSantis is heading abroad this week for a series of visits to allied nations, an opportunity for Florida Republican to step onto the international stage for the first time as a likely presidential contender. The official purpose behind DeSantis' globetrotting is an international trade mission. According to his office, DeSantis, as well as First Lady Casey DeSantis and two respective representatives of his administration, will travel to Japan, South Korea, Israel, and the United Kingdom to meet with officials to chat up political business partnerships. The trade mission will give us an opportunity to strengthen economic relationships and to continue to demonstrate Florida's position as an economic leader, the governor said in a news release on Thursday. While in Israel, DeSantis will also keynote an event hosted by the Jerusalem Post in the Museum of Tolerance, Jerusalem. The appearance there comes at a time of increased tension between the United States and its Middle East ally over Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's judicial overhaul proposal. The trip will spotlight DeSantis' foreign policy credentials as he inches toward the White House bid. DeSantis rose to national consciousness as a pandemic contrarian, and by leading his state through a series of cultural fights. But his view on the world's affairs has been less scrutinized until recently, when the governor offered a series of contradicting opinions on the war in Ukraine. Okay, so I don't know what CNN's trying to get at, so let's continue here. DeSantis remarked that support for Ukraine was not a vital national interest set off alarm bells among hawkish Republicans in Congress before the governor backtracked an interview with Piers Morgan and called for Russian President Vladimir Putin a war criminal. He further obscured his position a few days later by dismissing the war as a fight over the borderlands. Over his nearly 6 years as a congressman in Washington, DeSantis, a former naval lawyer stationed in both Guantanamo Bay in Iraq, served as the House Foreign Affairs Committee, where he was often critical of President Barack Obama's overseas agenda. As governor, he was urged hardline policies against communist governments in Cuba and China, and recently banning TikTok on state government devices and pushing legislation that would make it illegal for Chinese nationals to buy property in Florida. Guantanamo Bay in Iraq, served as the House Foreign Affairs Committee, where he was even as he is scheduled to meet with the allies to encourage business with his state. DeSantis on Friday poked fun at the United Nations Committee resolution that criticized an anti-riot law he championed as governor. "I wear that criticism as a badge of honor," he said at the event hosted by the Heritage Foundation outside of Washington. DeSantis' trip abroad makes the first time that he left the United States soil on official business since the early days of the first term as governor. In 2019, when he visited Israel along with the state's elected cabinet members as an elected official, DeSantis has not visited a foreign country other than Israel. DeSantis' predecessor, now United States Senator Rick Scott, embarked on more than a dozen trade missions during his tenure as governor. DeSantis, though, has focused largely on issues at home, while also dealing with coronavirus outbreak that significantly restricted travel for most of his first term. So I don't even know if I should continue the CNN article because, again, they're having a lot of obviously they're having a one-sided view on this. They don't like DeSantis. They obviously want DeSantis to back away because they know that DeSantis is very, very powerful. And they know that Trump had a 25% approval rating at the time of making this video. And at the time of the election in 2020, he had a 35% approval rating. So if he lost with other factors factoring in, if he lost with a 35% approval rating, Donald Trump, then Donald Trump's going to lose again. If we had the same exact matching up in 2024, Trump is bound to lose, and his approval rating is only dropping. And with DeSantis is well known, but he's not as well known as every single American already having an opinion on him. He's known, but he's not as known as Trump, obviously. Now, moving on to the next article, we actually have an MSNBC article. We have America's Stand Your Ground horror story. In the case of George Zimmerman, the law kept him out of prison. Will Ralph Yall's shooter walk free as well? Now, this is obviously very wrong, but let's see what they have to say. You have heard the horror story too many times before. A black teenager shot down during a mundane errand. In 2012, it was a quick trip to a convenience store. The teenager was 17 and he was on his way back to his father's place with a bottle of juice and a bag of Skittles. He was wearing a hoodie. His name was Tyvon Martin. A 28-year-old neighbor, George Zimmerman, claimed he was acting in self-defense when he shot Tyverman. There had been a series of robberies in the area. He said he shot Tyverman because he was afraid. He feared bodily harm. Months passed before Zimmerman was actually arrested and charged Zimmerman was not charged on the spot because police said that they could not disprove his vision of events. That he was defending himself, that he stood his ground. Okay, so obviously we're missing a little bit of, context here. If he says that something was happening, let's look at the fact and say, okay, let's see security footage, let's see this, let's see that. Were you actually acting in self-defense, or were you just doing this out of, as an excuse? Are you just saying that because you want this to be an excuse? So this is what a lot of people are not saying. We need self-defense in this country because this is what holds the country together. But we can't just go around killing each other because that's not going to be the solution either. If we constantly do an eye for an eye, nobody is left with sight anymore. Everybody is blind. If we do a hand for a hand, then everybody cannot have any more hands because we have done it so many times. There needs to be a certain extent that we are going to go, but there can't be too much of an extent because that's overboard, but we can't go too little of an extent because that's just not going to work. There needs to be a happy middle ground. After weeks of protesters surrounding the alarm, Zimmerman was finally charged with second-degree murder. Eventually, he was acquitted. Okay, so in the United States, we do not go based off of protests. We do not make actions and laws based off of protests in this country because we're entitled to a fair and just jury in the jury of our prayers. We're entitled to this in the United States. And in some states, if we don't try the people, if we don't go to court and try to sue the people and try to get them arrested within 2 days, they have to go back home for the temporary dates until we do have a court date scheduled for them. In 2020, a 25-year-old black man went to an afternoon jog in coastal Georgia town. His workout caught the attention of 3 local men who grabbed their guns, hopped in a truck, and began to follow the jogger. The men said that there had been a string of robberies in the area. They said that they were scared. They said that they thought the jogger was a thief. The jogger was Ahmed Armory. The men chased him down and shot him dead. Still, they also walked away from the shooting as free men. They claimed that they were defending themselves under the state's stand your ground laws. More than 10 weeks passed before the men were arrested. They were eventually convicted of murder. Stand your ground laws have exploded after 2012 when Zimmerman's killed Trayvon Martin. Laws in at least 28 states and Puerto Rico allow that there is no duty to retreat an attacker in any place in which one is lawfully present. Instead, a person who is reasonably believes that they are in danger of death or serious harm can use deadly force. But the law tends to exacerbate some political fatal racial disparities. First, there's a question on whose presence is in the country and often deemed suspicious or questionable, and whose really are. Okay, so the thing is that we're taking a racist approach at this already, but we're not going to sit here and say that in upstate New York, a shooting happened, the same exact situation as what they're going to start saying, because, again, this is what happened with another guy. So a black man went up to a house and he was shot through the door. This happened recently. But at the same exact time, a few days prior to this, I would say, in upstate New York, a group of girls went up to a house. They went up the wrong driveway and they were shot at multiple times. This girl was white. But the media doesn't want to talk about the latter case because the former case sounds better to them. They want to take the racial approach to everything because it garners headlines, it makes them money, but they don't want to sit here and say, listen, we're going to apply this fairly. No, they don't want to apply this situation fairly because of the fact that they know that there is no or almost no racist people in the United States. We voted a black president in the United States. You cannot say America is racist. Moving into the next article, we actually have a Daily Wire article. We have United States diplomats evacuated from Sudan as conflict intensifies. American diplomats and their families have been evacuated from Sudan as fighting between racial factions has intensified. Reuters reports that the process involved half a dozen aircraft and was carried out in coordination with the Rapid Support Forces. According to an earlier reporting, 70 personnel were to be evacuated, though many Americans remain in Sudan. The State Department acknowledges that some records show that 16,000 citizens may be in Sudan, but officials consider those figures to be inflated, CBS News reports. Other foreign nationals begin evacuating from a Red Sea port in Sudan on Saturday. Reuters noted that adding the urban warfare has made the exiting the nation increasingly difficult, leaving many stranded in the capital city of Khartoum. On Thursday, National Security spokesman John Kirby spoke at the White House press briefing, during which he discussed the increasingly dangerous conditions in Sudan, specifically in Khartoum. The focus right now is on urging both sides to stop this violence, to abide by a ceasefire, to allow humanitarian aid to get to people that need it, Kirby said. I mean, there's already shortages of food. There's concern over shortages of medicine and water. The situation is dire in Khartoum, and we continue to urge both sides now to stop this violence. Multiple other nations have either pulled citizens out of Sudan or are planning evacuations. including Saudi Arabia and Jordan. Evacuations are increasingly challenging as both sides involved in the conflict have failed to observe ceasefire agreements reached in order to allow for safe passage. CBS News reports that over 400 people have been killed in the conflict since April 15. President Joe Biden released a statement regarding the operation to exacerbate the embassy personnel from Sudan, thanking service members as well as the nations of Dubai, Ethiopia, and Saudi Arabia for their apparent assistance. The president went on to condemn the ongoing violence. This is what he said, and I quote, "We are temporarily suspending operations at the United States Embassy in Sudan, but our commitment to Saudi people and the future they want for themselves is unending," the statement concluded. Okay, so this is the thing. This is a really bad situation, and of course, everything falls apart when it's in the hands of Joe Biden. If we were going back into 2020 or 2021, this was really never happening. I mean, except for the Afghanistan situation and the Afghanistan failure that we had as many of our military officials were sadly killed in a suicide bombing. This really never happened under Donald Trump's watch. Moving into the next article, we actually have a Federalist article. We have Bill Lee's red flag law is an unconstitutional travesty. The Tennessee governor confuses do something ism with bravery. Tennessee Governor Bill Lee is asking lawmakers to support new legislation that would temporarily block someone who is deemed a threat to themselves or others from having guns, writes Axios. That's one way of putting it. Another, more precise way would be to say Lee supports a law that forces people accused of a pre-crime to sit down with state-appointed psychiatrists and lawyers to prove their innocence before the government decides if they can keep their guns. If that person says the wrong things, cop can show up at the home, search it, demand the accused hand over his property, not just any property, but property explicitly protected by the Constitution, without offering any evidence that he's committed or ever planned to commit a crime. In selling his bill, Lee claims that guns can be taken from those accused of having a psychiatric disorder, alcohol dependence, or drug dependence. But federal law already prohibits the sale of a gun to anyone who has been adjudically as a medical defective. And many people who drink or take drugs don't have a propensity toward violence. Excessive drinking might be bad for you, but it's illegal, as is gambling about chemtrails, pondering how to overthrow the government, and hating your neighbors intentionally. If an alcoholic is found guilty of a pre-crime, Lee's bill only affords him a single hearing to rectify the situation for each act of suspicion, which can be in effect for up to 180 days. Even if he pulls his life together, repents, and becomes a devout Seventh-day activist, the state can keep asking for extensions on puberty. Of course, even those who with prevalent depression with an emotional disorder aren't often would-be killers. 1 in 8 Americans take antidepressants, yet one suspects laws like this will only stigmatize depression and make gun owners less inclined to seek help. More importantly, though, Lee fails to mention in his fact sheets that the bill allows the state to take firearms on the basis of a serious behavioral condition, which includes functional impairment and substantially interferes with or limits a person's role of functioning in a family, school, occupational, or community activities. The antics are mine, because Lee's standards, despite his contention that there is a high burden of proof, could include basically anyone who met the psychiatric diagnostic criteria for depression and stopped going to a weekly softball game. Sure, the law includes penalties for false and bad faith statements by cops and third parties, but those would be all impossible to prove or prosecute because the basis of the statute issuing a temporary mental health order of protection is extraordinarily broad. If someone is threatening others with violence, Tennessee already has numerous laws on the books that allow for arrest. If it already has a law that allows for the immediate detention of people that are deemed dangerous to themselves or others, every state does. And yet, the numerous recent mass shootings, the perpetrator has been known to the police, and they did nothing. The Covenant school shooting, Lee maintains, makes it impossible not to act. But it's important to remember that as far as we know, nothing in Lee's proposal would have stopped the shooter. The mother, who never appears to be reported her daughter for mental illness, probably wasn't even aware that her adult child still owned guns. As far as we know, the killer never threatened anyone publicly before the shooting, nor did she pose a danger to herself. For all we know, the shooting was an act of terrorism or conducted over some personal grudge. We didn't know until, or if, the sheriff of Nashville releases her manifesto. One suspects that gun controllers will soon cook up studies to tell us red flag laws are amazing. But to this point, no major study, including a meta-analysis conducted by Rand Corporation, RAND, has conclusively found them to be effective. Many of these state laws are even worse than Lee's proposal, as they are permitted ex parte orders. But even if these laws are useful on the margins, they are a serious attack on the 2nd, 4th, 5th, and 6th Amendments. Red flag laws just give authorities power to work around normal evidentiary standards. Perhaps we should try to uphold the tens of thousands of laws that already govern gun ownership before passing new ones. And I completely agree with this. If the laws on the book that protect children are not helping children, then we need more security at schools. That's the main issue here. We're not going to sit here and say, no, we need to take your guns away. No, because the law-abiding citizens are not going to break the laws. They're law-abiding citizens. Do people have a hard time following this? Law-abiding citizens don't break laws. It is against the law to kill a child. It's against the law to bring a firearm to a school. These are laws that we already have on the books. But of course, we don't want to talk about that for some strange reason. Now moving on to the next article, we actually have another article from the Federalist. We have clueless criminal ed critics accidentally make a killer case for it. If you think classical education is racist, tell that to W.E.B. Du Bois. With one small hiatus, I've spent the better part of the last 20 years involved in the education. My own children has received a classical education, and being informally familiar with the classical model, I'm a big believer in this particular approach to learning. So when I noticed a popular trend on what is unfortunately the internet's most influential website, perpetrating the growing interest in classical education, it naturally caught my attention. With the failures of public education becoming more evident daily, the interest in classical education has suddenly become intense. Obviously, I was curious about what the people were saying, but upon reading the thoughts of Michael Harriot, a columnist for the Grio, guest on MSNBC programs, board-certified Wapiologist, and for our purposes, guy with 500,000 Twitter followers, I was dumbstruck. All I could think of was the Adam Sandler's 1995 classic film, Billy Madison, with which underneath its facial facade, it appropriately enough, a Clarkson call for the necessary of quality education. At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought. Everyone in the room is now dumber for having listened to it. I award you no points. And may God have mercy on your soul. Dead white guy is bad. If you suspect I'm being so too harsh, I'm happy to have you read that the thread and come to your own conclusions. Regardless, let's taste test the hell broth of fallacies, ignorance, and ill-defined accusations of racism, shall we? To the extent I can pull out a province out of the Harriet mess, it seems to be that classical education doesn't measure a student's ability to learn or teach them to learn. It teaches the students to learn like white people learn, who have already been deemed smart because they know white things. While obviously there are cultural differences that can affect one's learning environment, I, along with the vast majority of normal people, don't happen to believe that the basic knowledge and how you go about learning is relative to one's skin color. Yet, educats everywhere increasingly believe that what Harriet is saying, for instance, a proposed California mathematics curriculum declares that focusing on students getting the right answer, asking students to show their work, and grading them based off of the ability to do problems correctly is white supremacy culture in the mathematics classroom. Of course, it's even worse in subjects that are as literal as math. In response to the Black Lives Matter movement, Reuters' English department announced that it will be rejecting traditional grammar introduction in favor of critical grammar, yet another absurd academic idea to grow out of the Marxist critical theory hydra. This approach challenges the familiar dogma that writing instruction should limit emphasis on grammar/sentence level issues, so as to not put students from multilingual, non-standard academic English backgrounds at a disadvantage, said an email written by Reuters English Department Chair Rebecca Walcherick. Instead, it encourages students to develop a critical awareness of the varsity of choices available to them with regard to micro issues in order to empower them to equip them to push against biases based on written accents. To the extent we do have to introduce race into any of these debates, read that email again and ask yourself, is there anything that is more a product of white culture run amok than this obtuse academics? If Walcherick was forced to explain what she was doing here with any actual directness and clarity, it would be even more obvious, pardoning, and stupid than it already is. But I'm not honestly sure Harriet herself understands the value of written communication, period. See, classical education is bad because it requires different people to learn the same skills. To prove his point, he tells the story of his cousin who apparently had perfect pitch and could play all kinds of music by ear. But when he made it to junior high, he couldn't get into the band because he couldn't read music. His problem was not that he couldn't read music, it was that he couldn't learn the method of translating sounds, notes, terrible cliffs, etc. That was created for people who do not know how to. What he was created for people that don't know how to do what he knows what to do. I'd argue that playing music by ear is actually reading music. While musicians who can't read music may thrive in certain contexts, there are many, many reasons that there are a specific as they are obvious why reading music would be a prerequisite for getting 30 kids in a school band to play together. Regardless, follow the logic here. If it's better to play by ear than to read music, then it's better to alliterate for speech too. Written communication is just for people who do not know how to talk and memorize speeches. People who talk don't write are actually writing. People who talk and don't write are actually writing. Anyways, being asked to demonstrate objective facts and learn shared rules of language to promote mutual understanding while universally understanding to be an essential part of all forms of education until about 15 minutes ago. Claiming this feature is unique to classic education, let alone that this is racism, is equal parts dishonest and insulting. So then, what exactly does Harriet think that classical education is? Harriet claims that he had a classical education, but that appears to be a shorthand for the fact that, quote, my mom was big on the classics. Whatever that means, he knows enough on the name check Dorothy Sayers, who wrote the essay, quote, The Lost Tools of Learning, which was a very influential in the classic ed movement. He also briefly mentions the sociometric methods, and he posts a graphic illustrating the trivium. But he doesn't go into specifics of any of this. Granted, he's doing all of this on Twitter, so perhaps he can be forgiven for not getting granular. Except that when he does settle on defining classical education is little more than something dead white guys had. But there's a bigger reason why classical education is a sham. All these people are dumb. All these philosophers from Greece and Rome were wrong. They thought the sun revolved around the earth. They thought the moon was a star. They didn't know things. If you suspect Harriet is one who doesn't know things, well, come collect your prize. Let me introduce to you Astyages of Samos, an ancient Greek astronomer and mathematician who presented the first known holistic model that placed the sun at the center of the known universe, with the earth revolving around the sun, once a year, rotating around its axis once per day. Arcturus wasn't the only Greek to say this either. According to the Plutarch, another Greek astronomer, Solidus of Salarissa, demonstrated that the earth revolved around the sun a century later than Arcturus, though no record of his proof survives. Arcturus also made key discoveries about the size of the moon and the sun, as well as far away they were from the earth. Corporus and Tycho Brahe had made discoveries about astronomy utilizing Astyages' work because they weren't arrogant enough to decide he didn't know things, merely because he lived 1,800 years before they did. I mean, you can believe this rogue couldn't prove his theories about stellar paradox just because telescopes hadn't been invented yet. And I completely agree. So if you think that everyone before you is dumb just because they had a different opinion than you, then it's not racist in itself. Now, I completely agree with that article. And that being said, we're going to end this. With that being said, we're going to move into Music Monday. And if you do not listen to this podcast on Rumble, then that's going to be it for this episode. Please, if you don't listen to this podcast on Rumble, then that's going to be it for this episode, and I will see you guys tomorrow. Thank you all for watching, and if you like this episode, please like and subscribe down below, because I do post new episodes of this show every single Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Thank you all for watching. The Demetrios Araujo Show is copyright Araujo Studios 2023. Thank you all, and have a great one.